Everybody knows about the big names from free agency, but what about the guys that were left behind to take starting roles or consequently were maybe hurt by the free agents that were coming in? What about the trickle-down effect guys? This video is for those guys who people may not be talking about them as much, but they are just as big a deal in Dynasty Fantasy Football, and you need to know what to do with them. Drop a like on the video if you enjoy the free agency stuff, and make sure you're subscribed as well. If you play Dynasty, we appreciate it. Help support the channel. Let's talk about Bashul Tootin, a hot name right now where a lot of people want to know what we think of Bashul Tootin. What do you think of Bashul? Well, in my honest opinion of Bashul Tootin in a nutshell is this. I think that this is obviously a good thing for him. I also think that the Jags will bring somebody in to split with Bashul Tootin. In my own opinion, what we saw from Bashul Tootin last year probably wasn't enough for me from the Jaguars. Probably wasn't enough for me to think that they're going to just hand the keys over and Bashul Tootin's going to be an every down back. And the reality is, you know, especially for somebody of Bashul Tootin's caliber, a running back of that caliber, I don't think that happens that often in the NFL at all today. And even good running backs split backfields. And so that should come as no surprise to you. Last year, when you're looking at it, his rookie year, he had 15 points in his second game against Cincinnati because he did have a receiving touchdown. He only had two double-digit games on the year. He obviously missed a couple games, week 16 and 17, but really didn't get consistent carries. He only had, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4 games with 8 carries or higher here over the course of the entire year. But obviously, he's a big winner from free agency so far. And so what do we think with Bashul Tootin? It's all going to depend on, of course, what his price ends up settling at. In terms of right now, I started getting offers for Bashul Tootin Monday morning before anything had happened. And I kind of was like, I'm just going to hold Bashul Tootin and see. I still think I'm going to hold Bashul Tootin in Dynasty Fantasy Football for this reason. I don't think you're getting anything significant enough for him to be worth selling in Dynasty leagues to where you're going, it's worth just holding him at that point if you're not going to get a good return, in my opinion. Because his current price range, when you're looking at like where he's ranked around other guys in Dynasty, and again, it's going to depend on where this settles. But right now, it's climbing. So like Derrick Henry, RJ Harvey, Cam Scatterbo, Zach Charbonnet, we're getting close to the range where we'd start to sell Bashul Tootin.
If he gets up to where like Scatterbo and Jacobs
Etienne, Javonte, Chase Brown, that's where we're going to go, right? That's our selling point. I don't know if that's his real value, though, or if that's his hype value. And that's the thing. A lot of times you see these ranking lists, you see market value, and sometimes, you know, you think you can get that price for him and you can't. With Tootin, I know there's a lot of people excited about Tootin. I think he's worth shopping in Dynasty leagues. But again, if you're not going to get a pretty good return, like I think if you get into the Javonte Williams ranges, that's when I'd start selling Bashul Tootin for Javonte, Etienne, Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, those type of guys. And I don't think he's there yet, but it's worth shopping him in your leagues to see. And with Tootin, I mean, when you're looking at some of his advanced analytics last year, obviously didn't get a ton of production. From a yards per carry, you know, perspective, he had 3.7 true yards per carry. It's 55th in the NFL. Yards per touch, 33rd in the NFL. So nothing crazy. Nothing jumps off the page here. 10th in juke rate, I guess that's awesome. But at the same time, I mean, there's really nothing here from an efficiency standpoint, from a receiving standpoint, from a productivity standpoint that says that Bashul Tootin is going to be this game-breaking running back this year. Not to mention, you know, we're 1 year removed from Bashul Tootin getting drafted. We know that the NFL evaluates him as a fourth-round talent in the NFL, and fourth-round talents have come out in the last couple of years at the running back position and had pretty good fantasy football seasons for teams. But in this case, I think it's more likely than not that Bashul Tootin would be a very average to below average fantasy football running back. I don't see him being some kind of crazy fantasy football riser. That's my opinion. I could be wrong. And again, if we get up into the range that I was talking about, I'm just going to sell Bashul Tootin at that point.
Yeah, and context really does matter for our take on this as well. I mean, you have other early day 3 running backs that went in the draft last season right around where Tootin did in Scatterbo and Monangai, who were in equally competitive backfields and ended up getting significant workloads that were a lot more consistent than Tootin. And Tootin was the one guy who was tied to a running back who was like notably a known inefficient running back. Like Travis Etienne, since he came into the league, has not been known for his efficiency on the ground. He still has, you know, some really good traits, enough to get him a pretty solid contract long term with New Orleans. But again, it was enough where it's like, okay, Tootin really did have a good amount of opportunity to take over that workload, or at least eat into Etienne's workload. And Etienne was still just so much better across the board that, like, in flashes every once in a while, Tootin looked great, but he wasn't a Monangai who was really making that borderline of 50-50 split for a good chunk of time in the middle of the season with Swift, or Scatterbo, who took over that backfield outright in New York before he went down with the injury. So keep that in mind with Bashul Tootin. Just because Etienne is gone doesn't mean they're just like, oh, next man up, he's 100% our guy now. Like, he could have eaten into that workload a lot more than he actually did end up doing last season. So next guy we're going to talk about is Romeo Doubs, who is one of the latecomers to the party with the money that he ended up getting. But in classic classic New England fashion, they pay a massive bag to a guy who is, a middling wide receiver. And now you also want to take that with a grain of salt too. The face value money looks a lot worse than what the actual going market value of the wide receivers in the NFL right now are going for. Dobbs went for Wan'Dale prices, and I do think that's pretty fair considering what you've gotten from him over the past couple of years in Green Bay in a pretty crowded wide receiver room where they don't really like to lean on an alpha wide receiver. They don't ever give enough consistent target volume to anybody in that offense for them to really have opportunity to be like, the guy. And the other argument would be like, okay, well, none of those guys have the skill set to be the guy. That's fair, and that's true as well. I do like Dobbs going to New England for his potential upside opportunity, assuming that they don't go out and get somebody else or trade for an A.J. Brown or the rumors like Brian Thomas Jr., which I don't think is going to happen. Dobbs' reception perception just came out like this past week, and it really is a mixed bag. I mean, he's pretty efficient in the short to intermediate game. He's got some good post and dig routes, 54th percentile against man, 59th percentile against press. He's not going to be a zone beater. Like I just like making fun of New England because this is so on brand for them. Like they just go and they get like a middling efficient or not so efficient wide receiver, and they pay him, a ton of money and hope that he's going to be like their number one option. And he very well could be. Drake May can turn guys like Keyshawn Boutte and Stephon Diggs, who's in the twilight of his career, into a very productive option. I'm just telling you right now, with the way that New England operates their offense under Mike Vrabel, they seem to be pretty content with the weapons that they have and how those weapons complement each other and work together. And that is like, hey, it would be nice to have an alpha. You're not going to get that in Romeo Dobbs. Romeo Dobbs will be a role player, and he'll be a role player that, again, is getting paid Wan'Dale Robinson type money, which is not a guy that's going to be your number one option for the long term, unless he ends up taking some massive step forward and they end up getting him at a bargain. But like when you compare this to Alec Pierce's contract, who a lot of people were throwing fits about that, Alec Pierce made $120 million to Romeo Dobbs's 4 years, $80 million. So you can see the gap there between like those two talents. This really isn't, in my opinion, like speaking much to how Romeo Dobbs is going to be producing in 2026. I think this guy's probably going to be a wide receiver 3 again. And that's going to be reflected in my rankings. I moved him up to a top 50 wide receiver 48. He's right there with Christian Watson, Parker Washington, Josh Downs, Jacoby Myers, Quentin Johnston. I think just has just as good of a shot of being productive this year on a non-Greg Roman offense. Like this is really kind of the range that we're looking at. Some shots like Chris Godwin, Jaden Reed, Brandon Ayuk, depending on where he signs. It's just kind of an ugly range, with a bunch of unknowns and a lot of really low floor and low ceiling guys.
Let's talk about the Bucs wide receivers here. The ones that are left after Mike Evans goes to the 49ers was kind of surprised a lot of people, I think, around, Bucs fans included. I thought he was going to be a Buck for life personally, but guys like Emeka Egbuka and Chris Godwin, what happens to their stock? Emeka Egbuka has been an interesting one this offseason. Remember we started the offseason by talking about how we didn't really like his price. At the end of the season, before his slump really kind of set in for people, he was going like in the late second, early third of Dynasty startup drafts. Then you saw him slide after about 10 weeks of consistently muted performances to the fourth round about. And the price, honestly, for me with Egbuka, it's gone down so much that I'm kind of wishy-washy on whether or not what I want to do with Egbuka. I will say, Mike Evans leaving does open up a pretty significant amount of target volume for Egbuka. Although I don't necessarily think that was the problem for him later in the year. I think part of the problem for him, admittedly, from a context standpoint, was that Baker Mayfield was injured. I think there's a direct correlation when Baker Mayfield was hurt and then how those receivers were performing in that offense. But Mike Evans was always going to be the number one guy, the guy there in Tampa Bay. And so him leaving, and Godwin obviously being not only injury prone, but old at this point, it does open things up for Emeka Egbuka. It's just a matter of which Emeka Egbuka are we going to see, the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season Emeka Egbuka or the last 6 through 18. It was just, they were two completely different players, to be honest with you. And for Egbuka, I will stand by the fact that if his dynasty value rises to where he is going in the third round of startups, I personally don't think that Emeka Egbuka is the type of player to produce at a wide receiver 1 level consistently. I think he's more of a wide receiver 2 type player from a production standpoint. I look at him very similar to I look at like a Devontae Smith, where he's going to produce pretty consistently as he's going to have a wide receiver 1 upside. Let's compare their production profiles here. Devontae Smith obviously, has had a wide receiver 1 season in 2022. The rest of his seasons, he's really been in that wide receiver 2 range, but he does have that like low end wide receiver 1 upside. I view Emeka Egbuka's production profile as pretty much the same thing. He was the wide receiver 23 this year, and a lot of people are, projecting that he's going to get, peppered with these targets. The thing was, his games directly correlated. His performance is directly correlated with whether or not he scored a touchdown. In the games where he scored touchdowns, he scored in double digits every single one. In the games where he didn't, he only scored in double digits one time. And so a player that is that touchdown dependent from a production standpoint, I know that his rookie year typically isn't a guy that is going to gain and maintain like second round startup value in Dynasty or even really early third. And so I kind of hold the same stance here. I think Egbuka, I like him as a player. If he's going to go with the 4-5 turn in your Dynasty drafts, I think that's a fine price for him. I'm totally comfortable taking Emeka Egbuka there. Maybe even mid-4th. But at the point where he jumps into the third round, if he does end up jumping there after this, that's where I'd probably be out on Emeka Egbuka. It's the same exact thing we said at the video at the beginning of the offseason. We don't like that price for Egbuka. We like Egbuka, but it's all about price in Dynasty. And I think I can get production similar guys 3 rounds later. And so it's stock up for him. I would say it's stock up for Godwin, who's a little bit more of an achievable guy to get on your roster, who obviously didn't play a whole lot last year, but is going to be coming back for his 31-year-old season. He's still under contract, and he is probably going to be pretty productive as long as he stays healthy there. And he's pretty cheap right now. And so he's a guy I think if you can get your hands on, and he could be a potential borderline flex guy for you, I think that he's a decent option in Dynasty as well. Outside of that, though, obviously it leaves some targets there for these Tampa Bay wide receivers. Depending on where their stock goes, I might be interested in buying Chris Godwin. Emeka Egbuka, it's all price dependent on him. He's a very controversial asset in Dynasty. And again, if he does get to that third round, I'm probably not going to be buying him at that point.
So with Harvey at the moment, I mean, let's just look at J.K. Dobbins' contract, by the way, and just fact check and make sure hey, is this a legitimate contract? 2 years, $20 million. Obviously breaks down as $10 million a year. Guaranteed is only $8 million. So you'd assume a lot of that money is allocated to 2026 or $8 million of that allocated to 2026. And then 2027, they probably have an out depending on what he does this season. Will they want to pay J.K. Dobbins at 28 years old next year, $12 million? Probably not. So this is probably a 1-year deal for Dobbins. But again, the idea here and the point is, I think this is just how Sean Payton is going to continue to run his backfields like he has pretty much forever. And Kamara was, instead of Kamara being kind of the rule, I think he was the exception to the rule, which, by the way, Kamara was the exception to the rule because he was ultra productive and highly productive despite being in what was a true split, a true running back split in terms of snap share for a good bit of the early part of Kamara's career. I mean, with him and Mark Ingram, Ingram would get a lot of red zone work in the early part of his career. And he was getting a lot of first and second down usage. And then Kamara was kind of your receiving guy who was never going to have a ridiculous amount of rushing yards, but his receiving usage was going to make up for it. And he'd always end up being a mid running back 1. That's really, I mean, that was always best case scenario for RJ Harvey. And he just, in our opinion, doesn't have the talent level or the ability to ever get to that point. This is a 1A, 1B type of philosophy with Sean Payton, where he loves to do an even split and always have fresh legs on the field. And that's just going to be the reality at this point. And I think people are really coming to terms with that in Dynasty. When you're looking at his price right now, if you can get any of Jacob, Scadaboo, ETN, again, very similar to Tootin, I think Harvey is very close to where Tootin is valued right now in Dynasty. Then I would take any of those guys over RJ Harvey. I think Derrick Henry versus RJ Harvey depends on your contention status. If you're a contender going for it this year and you want to take a shot on Derrick Henry, go ahead and do it. And then once we get down to guys like Swift, Monangai, Tootin, Algier, Montgomery, at that point, none of those guys have long enough value insulation where I'm yeah, you definitely want to go with one of those guys. They're more promising than RJ Harvey. Not necessarily. Swift will probably outproduce him this year, but what's he going to be beyond this season? We don't really know. So at that point, at Harvey's price is a low end running back 2. I'm probably just holding.
Yeah, I probably would at that point too. Let's talk about Cam Scadaboo. Cam Scadaboo lost a pretty significant amount of value in Dynasty Fantasy Football pre-free agency because the Giants were rumored to be in on Kenneth Walker and potentially Breece Hall if Breece Hall were to hit the market and he didn't end up hitting the market. ETN was in that, and now it's Jeremiah Love. So his value is still hovering pretty low compared to what we saw it at. He's dropped quite a bit in market value. We've seen him go in the 7th round of Dynasty startups recently.
I'm just telling you guys right now, if Jeremiah Love is not a New York Giant, which there are a lot of teams that are going to be interested in Jeremiah Love, not just the Giants, So like really you're looking at what, like of the teams that could realistically
Tennessee,
get Jeremiah
New
Love,
York.
probably like 1 in 5 chance of the
Sure.
Giants getting Jeremiah Love. And that's assuming that they actually want to go that route.
I don't know why they would.
If they don't get Jeremiah Love, that is one of the biggest offseason value wins hands down. If you have Cam Scotty.
Yep. And honestly, he's getting to the point where he's a buy in Dynasty right now because you're basically just playing that game, and I'm willing to take that bet, honestly.
Yeah, and we understood the risk of that at a certain price when he was starting to get pretty high, but now it's so far down where it's like, okay, we're takers. We'll take him now.
Yeah, and so we would have been the first to tell you, like, yeah, maybe he's going to get Allgeiered, and that's the common thing I've heard over and over and over. He's going to get Allgeiered. He's going to get Allgeiered, and maybe he will. Maybe the Giants, they miss having a stud running back, and they draft Jeremiah Love. That would suck, honestly. And so it is a risky buy, but it is something I think you should consider depending on what his price is. If you got somebody that's completely, totally out on Cam Scotty because of what's been happening, I will buy on the guy who was 9th in the league in fantasy points per opportunity. The dude was efficient when he got the ball from a fantasy football perspective, and that's really all I care about. I think 6th in yards created per touch as well, 9th in dominator rating. He's got some. I don't think he's this every down fluid back. He is somebody who is, number one, super exciting to watch. Number two, has a ton of receiving upside when you're looking at what he was able to do last year as well. Obviously, he played really from weeks 2 through 8 and was in double digits every single one of those weeks. Got a ton of carries in all of them, but also had an 8-target game, a 7-target game, a 6-target game, and then some 2, 2, and 3-target games in there as well. But some pretty high floor when you're talking about those extra 3 to 5 points from the receiving game pretty much every game he played this year. Not to mention the games where he scored touchdowns, he was ultra productive. And so with Scat, I mean, he's a running back that's like not he's a step above, maybe a couple steps above a warm body getting carries. So if he is there, if he is the starter, then he's going to score fantasy points. He is a fantasy productive guy.
Yeah, and let's not act like he's got any more risk than the guys who he's priced around, which he's getting close to Tootin because of how much Tootin is rising.
Yep.
And then Jacobs and Harvey, who we just talked about Harvey, and then Henry, who is one injury away from his value being in the toilet for the rest of eternity.
Yep, that's right. So, again, for Scattaboo, it's a risky buy. If you are very risk averse and you like buying into uncertainty, Scattaboo is a pretty decent investment right now in Dynasty because he could go up a lot in value the second the Giants don't draft a running back, which again, do they draft a running back? I'll let you decide that, and I'll let you decide if you want to buy Cam Scattaboo based on that decision. But personally, I think Cam Scattaboo might be worth a look for your Dynasty team right now.
So I think one of the most underrated moves that you're going to hear of pretty much all offseason, because it was pretty much like this guy is going to go to this team to die, was Geno Smith getting traded to the New York Jets. That could not be, in my opinion, much better for a bridge quarterback when you're talking about the short-term production capability of a guy like Garrett Wilson in that offense, where you just had Justin Fields, and I don't even know who was playing quarterback for the Jets at the end of the season last year. And I guess it didn't matter because Garrett Wilson ended up being injured. Mm-hmm. But if you remember, while Fields was playing last year, before he went down with the injury and before Wilson went down with injury, he was actually a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. And now Geno Smith, again, you're going to assume with Geno at the helm and how bad the Jets are going to be this season, they're probably going to be wanting to pass the ball quite a bit. And I would also be willing to bet that between Geno Smith and Justin Fields, Geno's going to be the guy that gets the starting job next year as the bridge quarterback. 572 passing attempts in 2022, 499 in 2023, 578 in 2024, 448 in 2025. There's no Brock Bowers. There's no Jacoby Myers in that offense. It's Garrett Wilson, and that's it. It is Garrett Wilson, and that's it. And I know we say that every single year, but that did actually, before Wilson went down with the injury last season, that reigned true. And Wilson was very productive last season. He was productive, and that was with Justin Fields offering like no passing volume, but Wilson was the only relevant guy there. Now you have Geno Smith, who I really do believe is going to help improve the passing volume availability and opportunity for everyone in that offense, and we're just lucky enough for everyone to be only one person there. And that's going to be Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson, very insulated. He's held his value for a reason. He gets that massive extension last offseason. He's stuck with the Jets for better or for worse, really mainly for worse for the rest of his career, but he remains a foundational wide receiver because his production upside continues to be right up there with the best of them. Despite a really, really bad situation, he's always in top 18 conversation every single year. So in that range of where like Nico is, where Rome is, where Ladd is, where Burden and Marv are starting to sit, like he's starting to be in that value range, in that conversation where those players are. Again, those guys have just as many questions, maybe more value upside long term because of their situation, but their questions and their floor is actually quite a bit lower than Garrett Wilson. This is a guy that is going to see literally no value bump whatsoever from this Geno Smith move. And if you're a team that's looking to get a guy who's going to be a really solid, productive, like third option on your team as a contender, you can get him for a pretty decent price that isn't going to be like, high-end foundational or cornerstone level. And I think he was a very, very quiet, low-key winner from a fantasy upside perspective heading into 2026. So I'm not going to label him as like the hardest of buys. I might even go as far as saying soft buy. We've had Garrett Wilson as a market play a lot of times in his career, but I think he's a decent investment at the moment. He's definitely a hold for sure, at the very least.
Let's talk about Jordan Addison. Obviously, Kyler Murray not yet to the Vikings as of Wednesday at 3 o'clock when we're recording this video.
When he
does go, because he is going to go to the Vikings, Jordan Addison's stock is going to look a lot better than it has. He's been one of the best values right now in like 8th, really 9th round of Dynasty startups at the moment. You've been able to get pretty good prices for Jordan Addison. And so Addison is a guy that, as much as we've tried to short him in the past and everybody else has tried to short him, he's really done nothing but produce as a wide receiver 2 since he got in the league. Last year he only played 14 games, and it was kind of the end of his production streak there. He didn't play the first 3 games and then was playing the rest of the year with the quarterbacks there, and so he ended as a wide receiver 4. But when he's had competent quarterback play, his first years in the NFL, he was the wide receiver 23 and 21 with 9 and 10 touchdowns. Now, Addison's always been a guy that's been a little bit touchdown dependent, so I'll say that as well. But I do think as soon as we may be too late on this. It may come out and Kyler might already be there. And at that point, this advice is probably meaningless because he's going to jump up in value. This is just
flex advice.
It's sure, yeah, I was going to say. If
saying that we were in before.
Yes, that is very true. I'll be brief with this one. If the Kyler news has not come out by the time you see this video, I would probably go send an offer for Jordan Addison in your leagues because it's a pretty easy value win.
I have one case and one case alone, and this should literally be the only case that you need to invest in Jordan Addison. Weeks 4, 5, 7, and 8, Carson Wentz was the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. Weeks 4, 5, 7, and 8, Addison had 15, 15, 21, and 11 points, while Jefferson had 22, 19, 12, and 14 points. I don't have to tell you about the rest of the season because it was some of the worst fantasy production that we've ever seen for the talent level of this wide receiver room. It literally doesn't even take competent quarterback play for these guys to produce. It takes better than the worst quarterback performance we've probably ever seen analytically in the history of the NFL dating back to like 2000.
Yeah.
That's how bad McCarthy was. Anything better than McCarthy is going to result in production for both of these guys, and Addison obviously is the second guy there. So there's this nice little productive veteran running back that's been around for a while, and I understand he has a lot of miles on him, which is probably why he continues to fall. But this is classic to me. This is a classic example of buying or investing in a productive vet in the offseason, in the early offseason, before he almost assuredly gains 15 to 20% value back in August when people realize that, oh yeah, he's a lead running back. Oh yeah, he's the number 1 guy in Green Bay who's been productive for the last 2 years. And oh yeah, he's been a running back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a points per game perspective. He's been the running back 1 like 6 times in his 7-year career. Josh Jacobs, in my opinion, is one of the easiest productive veteran investments at the moment as he continues to fall in Dynasty. And the reason we have him in this video, this post-free agency video, is because he's continuing to fall because he's just getting lost in the sauce. Like some of it is like, you may have people in the Dynasty community that are downers on Josh Jacobs. I don't really see people being downers on Jacobs where they're like, oh, I think he's shot. I think he's washed. I think he's done. I don't even think people believe that. He's a 28-year-old running back going into his 8th year. He has a good amount of mileage on him. He's only passed like over 300 carries once in his career. I guess twice. He had 301 carries in 2024. But beyond that, he's usually like a early to middle of the 200s road kind of guy with his opportunity. He always ends up being like a mid to low end running back 1. This guy's, I don't think his wheels are going to fall off necessarily anytime soon, especially not in 2026. We can have a conversation after that, but like nothing about his situation has changed. If you remember when they brought in Jacobs in 2024, the look of this offense improved so much. I mean, this offense is dependent on Josh Jacobs. They like to run this offense through Josh Jacobs. And when Josh Jacobs is banged up and when he misses a little bit of time like he did at the end of the year, they struggle and they don't look nearly as good. Like Josh Jacobs is the motor of this offense, and LaFleur loves to do everything through him. This isn't going to stop in 2026, guys. And again, he's being lost in the sauce because we've got a ton of these running backs that are getting massive extensions. We've got Walker and ETN who were big risers. We've got a bunch of wide receivers that are getting the bag like Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce at this point is going to be sniffing the value range of Josh Jacobs in Dynasty, and I'll take a guy like Josh Jacobs. Your production upside that you're going to get from him is so much higher than a guy who didn't even eclipse 50 receptions last year, but he's so efficient with his receptions that he still, was productive. But that's kind of besides the point. The point being, Josh Jacobs is continuing to fall and no one's really saying anything about it. No. And I understand it's kind of like an ugly investment in Dynasty because he's not new or shiny or anything like that. He's a perpetually declining asset where while he's declining this year, he'll decline even more next year after he peaks in the middle of the season in 2026 while he's producing. And that's the point. If you're a reloading team, Josh Jacobs is a phenomenal investment right now. Absolutely phenomenal. You can't tell me that there's no contending team in August who will pay premium prices for him, even though they're not willing to do it right now in March. You can't tell me that's not going to happen. This is literally he is case in point that this is the guy, the prime example where you see this every single year. And he would be my vote for the number one guy who rises significantly. You could say that Henry and Adams might not as much because they're so old and they really could fall off at any point. And CMC's kind of an outlier. Saquon's already kind of up there. But with the price point that Jacobs is at the moment, he's essentially a guaranteed value winner.
Yeah, and another thing is he's so cheap. Like even if you buy into him and he does, what if he's hitting his cliff this year? Who cares? Like if the point where you're starting to get him 7th, 8th round, a guy with running back
you're
one
getting
upside,
almost risk free.
Exactly. Like the guys like that, if you have a really good Dynasty team, you should be able to let guys like that die on your roster and not take a super big value hit. And if you're competing and your team isn't good enough to take a 7th, 8th round value hit when a guy just dies off like a running back, then your team's probably not good enough to be competing. You should probably be reloading, and that's kind of our philosophy with how we play with our own teams when we're adding these veterans.
We've gotten no indication from Green Bay that they're even interested in moving on from him or even wanting to replace him. We haven't heard anything.
And I get that the injuries are a concern moving forward, but at the same time, I still think he's got plenty left and think he's got a couple good years left. Zach Charbonnet is a guy that's really been going higher in startup drafts here recently. We've seen him go as high as the 7th round, I think, and then the early 8th. When we've been doing some of our Dynasty startup drafts here on the channel. And the thing with Charbonnet is this is kind of my main thing with him. First of all, I think it is the most obvious thing of all time that they're going to draft a running back with their first 3 picks. The Seahawks will, because they were trying to get Dowdle, they were trying to get Allgeiered, they missed out on both of them. They're not going to let Sharbs, and who else? George Helani, Velus Jones. Kenny McIntosh, Cam Akers.
You've got to guess they would be a suitor for Rachaad White, right?
I just don't necessarily.
And if not, then they're getting a day 3 running back.
I don't love the pairing of White and Charbonnet personally.
I don't either. So what are they going to do?
I don't know. And that's part of my point. I think they're going to draft a running back. I think they're going to end up being a running back
day 3, or do you think they go for Price or Coleman?
If I had to guess,
day
it would be day 2. Yep, I think they use a day 2 pick on a running back. So with that being said, Charbonnet's coming off of a torn ACL. And you're not buying low on him. If you're buying him right now, you're actually buying kind of high on him. He's the running back 25 right now on our website, like Keep Trade Cut, for example. In some of our other ADPs, he's gone a little bit higher than that at times. But if you can move him for Derrick Henry, I think I'd rather have Henry. In fact, I think I'd rather have Bashal Tutin than Zach Charbonnet.
I'd rather have Swift.
I would easily rather have Swift as well, and he's been below him. I'd probably rather have him and Allgeiered are probably even for me. I'd probably have them in the same tier. But he's already kind of going up in value. I don't think... Look, I was the biggest Zach Charbonnet fan coming out of college. I loved him as a prospect. I won't be buying him on my Dynasty teams. In fact, I'd probably lean soft sell or shop at least for Zach Charbonnet and see what you can get. I know, understanding his upside, but he's coming off of an ACL. I know that there's plenty of data that running backs can come back off an ACL and not be affected. And I know that. At the same time, though, they're bringing somebody else in. Zach Charbonnet is going to be in the same role he's been in for the last 3 years, and he's never been higher than running back 24.
You got to think.
So do you want to flex that?
You got to think after the ACL tear, you saw a little bit of an initial dip in value, but now he's pretty much being priced right back where he was before the ACL tear. Before
he's higher, he's higher because of Kenneth Walker leaving, which I understand that should affect his value. However, again, like you're buying into somebody in Kenneth Walker that again has been no higher than the running back 24. He's going at good flex level prices, and in my opinion, he's not the best flex. I think he has upside as a running back, but if I can flex again, like Nathan says, Swift, Henry, even Tootin, I would take Harvey over Charbonnet still. I would rather have those guys. Not to mention there are guys at other positions in Charbonnet's range where you can get wide receivers as well. Maybe even get like a tight end and solve your tight end issue if you want there, because we like that. But Charbonnet right now, in terms of like where he's being valued on the Flock site with the expert rankings, he's next to like Romeo Doubs, George Kittle, Rico Dowdle, Josh Downs. So he's pretty low on the Flock site. So there's kind of a pretty big difference between where we have him ranked and where the market has him ranked and where he's been going in startups. So honestly, it's going to just depend on what you can get. Again, you got to see where his value settles. I'm not going to be super high on like getting him to start him in my lineups though this next year.
No. Swift will be the last guy that we talk about here. Again, someone who's kind of getting lost in the sauce. I think people we're expecting maybe that he ends up being cut, moving on from the Bears, and in reality, like he was still under contract through 2026 with the Bears, and at the price that they're gonna be able to hold on to him, I mean, it's the going rate for guys of DeAndre Swift's caliber, if not a little bit less. I mean, he's getting owed $8 million this year, $8.8 million, which is right around what Javonte just got paid on his 3-year extension. That was an underpay in our opinion. Kenneth Gainwell just got a 2-year, $14 million extension, $7 million a year. Allgeier just got $6 million a year. Rico Dowdle in that $6 million range. J.K. Dobbins getting paid $8 million this year. So like, that's the range that Swift is being priced right now, according to market, with his contract that, again, he signed a couple of years ago. If you're like resetting his deal and he's signing with another team, he's probably up in the $10 million range. I think you're getting a pretty good price for him if you're the Chicago Bears, so why get rid of him? And again, I think they've already demonstrated that. It's a new league year. I don't know when they would be able to like avoid this cap hit if they were to cut him, so don't quote me on this. But at this point, I would assume that the Bears are probably just going to hold on to him. And at that point, like we're going to continue to get closer to the start of the season, and people are going to realize, oh, this running back room was actually pretty decent last year. Oh, DeAndre Swift had one of the most productive seasons that we've ever seen in his entire career. And they're about to run it back. And Kyle Monangai, even though he's got some, juice, didn't really like take over Swift's role, because Swift actually was pretty dang solid and he's got a lot of receiving capability. Like this is the perfect situation that you want him to be in a Ben Johnson offense where he's going to continue to produce. And while everybody wants a different running back to be in the Bears offense, while everybody was hoping and praying for Breece Hall or somebody else, it just didn't happen. Ashton Genty last year, it didn't happen. They tried. They're stuck with DeAndre Swift, and they're doing okay with DeAndre Swift. And at price, it's pretty worth it. So go ahead and get him before he goes up in value as well.
Yeah, that was one that I've been trying to buy him for quite a while now in Dynasty, because I figured they'd just run it back with him. And we'll see if he gets a little bit of a value bump here. It'd be pretty nice for my portfolio. But again, these are guys, not obvious winners or losers, but ones that are definitely worth talking about for Dynasty Fantasy Football and kind of our verdicts on it. Make sure you drop a like on this video again, and make sure you subscribe. If you do play Dynasty and you have these guys in your team, you want to know what to do with them for your specific roster. Every roster is different. We take a look at all of these blueprints personally. When we do them, we can do a team blueprint for your team. When you join, you get one for free. When you join, you can use all the site tools, the trade calculator, you get our Dynasty rankings. You're going to get, again, a free blueprint. You can get in a domain league if you want to play in a Dynasty league with other active players. You can get all kinds of stuff as well. The Discord community, we got a lot to offer you. And so again, we can do a team review for you. Take a look at your Dynasty team and see what you should be doing, what moves you should be making based on your contention status and what your roster strengths are. And so again, that's flockfantasy.com/domain. Have to use code domain to unlock the free blueprint, but the link's down in the comments. All right. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you here next week.